I had no intention of hiking that day. It was supposed to be a quick drive, just a detour through the national park on my way to visit my uncle's cabin, an aging place that creaked with memories and mice. But when the GPS lost signal and my phone dropped to 0 bars, I found myself parked on the shoulder of a winding forest road with no one in sight and nothing but trees around me, tall and silent like they'd been waiting. A narrow path caught my eye, not on any map, barely more than a game trail, but something about it pulled at me, like an itch you can't quite reach. I started walking. The deeper I went, the thicker the trees grew, swallowing light, muffling sound. There was no birdsong. No insects. Just me and the faint crackle of twigs underfoot. That's when I saw her. She was sitting on a fallen log, barefoot, knees pulled to her chest, long dark hair spilling over her shoulders like riverweed. She didn't flinch when I approached. If anything, she looked like she had been waiting. "Sorry," I stammered, "I didn't think anyone else was out here." She smiled, small and tired, and tilted her head. "You're not lost, are you?" There was something odd in her voice. Not the words, but the way she spoke them. Measured. Like they had weight. "No, I'm just wandering, I guess." She stood then, graceful and slow, like someone moving through water. Most people who find this path don't mean to. Her feet were caked in dirt, but she didn't seem to care. She told me her name was Elia. Said she lived in a cabin a little deeper into the woods, alone. Something about the way she said it felt like a challenge. The sky was dimming by then, orange light leaking through the trees. I thanked her and said I should head back, but she stepped forward, gently brushing my sleeve with her fingertips. "You'll come again," she said. I didn't answer. But even as I walked away, I knew I would. I never saw where she'd come from. No footprints. No sound. Just her, alone in the forest, like a ghost with soft eyes. And when I finally made it back to the road, the sun had dipped far lower than it should have. I checked the time. I'd only been gone 20 minutes. But the sky said otherwise. I went back the next day. I told myself it was just to stretch my legs again, clear my head, but I knew better. Elia was waiting. Always in the same spot, on that same fallen log, as though she hadn't moved since the moment I left. She smiled without surprise. "You came sooner than I thought." The forest around her was strangely quiet again. Not dead, just holding its breath. We talked for hours. About nothing and everything. She asked questions, unusual ones. What did I fear most when I was alone at night? Did I ever dream of places I'd never been, yet felt familiar? Had I ever heard footsteps behind me in an empty house? She laughed when I hesitated. Her laugh was soft, like the breeze moving through dead leaves. And every time I tried to learn more about her, she turned the conversation like a stone in her palm, careful, deliberate. She said she had no family, that she had always lived near the woods. That her cabin was just far enough away to be forgotten. Over the next week, I returned again. And again. I couldn't help myself. She had this pull, like gravity underwater. I would think of her voice in the quiet hours of the morning and find myself halfway down that trail before the kettle even boiled. And she knew things. The name of my childhood dog, long dead. A poem I'd written in a journal and never shown to anyone. The exact words my mother whispered to me the night she passed. I asked how she could possibly know. She smiled, sad and knowing. Sometimes the forest listens. Her eyes, green shot through with gold, never left mine. Looking at her felt like standing too close to the fire, warm, yes, but a heat you shouldn't trust. Once, she reached out and placed her hand on my chest, right over my heart. It felt cold, like a stone pulled from a stream. "You've carried sorrow for a long time," she said. "It leaves a mark. I can see it." And I believed her. It never occurred to me to tell anyone about her. Not out of secrecy, but because something told me no one else would see her the way I did. Or worse, maybe they wouldn't see her at all. I should have asked more questions. But every time I tried, her voice smoothed the edges of my thoughts like a lullaby. The forest path never looked the same twice. Yet I never once got lost. It began with the birds. One morning, I noticed they stopped singing when I reached the clearing. A hush would fall the moment I stepped beneath the boughs. No rustle of squirrels, no wing flutter, no distant hum of insects. Just silence, heavy and watchful. Elia sat in her usual place, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She smiled, but her eyes lingered too long. The smile didn't quite reach them. "I've missed you," she said. "The forest grows anxious when you're gone." I tried to laugh it off. "Does it really notice me?" "Oh," she said, tilting her head, "it knows exactly who you are." Her words echoed strangely in my mind, like they were spoken just behind my ears. That day, I noticed something else. A pool of still water had gathered between the roots of a tree. I caught my reflection as I walked by, and froze. She was behind me, just a few paces back, but in the water, her reflection stood still, facing the wrong way. It didn't blink. Didn't move. I turned to look at her. She was smiling. As if she knew what I'd seen. "Reflections lie," she said gently, "when the truth is too heavy." Another time, I came across a deer on the path, eyes wide with panic. It bolted as soon as I stepped forward. Moments later, Elia emerged from between the trees, barefoot and calm. She didn't speak of the deer, but when I glanced down, there was blood on her foot. Just a smear, almost invisible. At night, I started dreaming of her. But in the dreams, she never spoke. She would stand at the foot of my bed, her long hair soaked and dripping, lips parted like she was about to say something. But the only sound was wind and creaking wood. Sometimes I would wake with the scent of damp earth in my room. Once, I returned to the forest just after rain. The air was thick with rot, the leaves glistening with water. Elia was waiting, but her clothes were dry. Dusty, even. Her hair moved though there was no breeze. I asked her what she was. It just slipped out of me. She only stared. Her eyes flickered. Like candlelight behind frosted glass. "You're beginning to remember," she said. But I didn't know what she meant. I told myself I was tired. That I was letting my imagination win. But when I left the forest that day, I turned once to look back at her. And saw 3 of her, standing side by side in the trees, perfectly still. Only one of them blinked. The last time I saw her, the sky was the color of wet ash. I felt it before I even set foot on the trail, an ache in the air, like the trees themselves were mourning. The usual path had changed again, as it always did, but this time it felt unfamiliar. Off. The roots reached farther across the ground, twisted like knuckles. Every step sank deeper into moss, heavy, reluctant. Elia didn't greet me. The log where she always sat was empty, blanketed in damp leaves. I called her name once, then again, my voice too loud in the hush. No answer. I walked farther than I ever had before, through thickets I didn't recognize. The forest pressed tighter around me. Branches grazed my arms like fingers. I started to wonder if I had crossed some invisible line, one that wasn't meant to be crossed. Then, I found the cabin. Or what was left of it. It was no more than a skeleton, rotting beams and a half-collapsed chimney swallowed by vines. The forest had reclaimed it long ago. There was no glass in the windows, no door in the frame. Just a black hole gaping in the wood like a silent mouth. Inside, the floor was sunken, and everything was draped in cobwebs and time. But in the center of the room, resting on a tree stump that had grown straight up through the boards, was a photograph. A weathered Polaroid. Her face. Elia's face, clear as the day I met her. But the photo was yellowed, aged, the corners curled like they'd been held 1,000 times. She stood beside the cabin, barefoot, smiling. On the back, someone had scrawled a year in faint pencil, 1976. My hands went cold. She hadn't just lied. She couldn't have existed the way I'd known her. This place hadn't been lived in for decades. Outside, the forest grew suddenly still. Then I heard it, a whisper behind me, soft and low. My name. Spoken not with affection, but with remembrance. I turned. Nothing. The shadows stretched long now, pooling like ink. I ran. Branches tore at my sleeves, roots caught my ankles, but I didn't stop. The forest didn't want me to leave, I felt it. It was holding on. When I finally burst out onto the road, gasping and scraped, the sun had dipped behind the hills. My car was still there, engine cold. I never found the trail again. Weeks passed. I returned, again and again, searching every bend and thicket. But the forest had gone still. Normal. Indifferent. Sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I still hear her voice, just beneath the hum of the house. Whispering my name. And once, in the reflection of my bedroom window, I saw her standing behind me. Smiling. I never meant to drive that far-off route. The storm had rolled in faster than any I'd ever seen, lightning splitting the sky in jagged veins, thunder so close it rattled the steering wheel. My phone had lost signal an hour earlier, and the backroads I took, trying to avoid a flooded highway, only led me deeper into nowhere. By the time I saw the farmhouse, I was desperate. It stood crooked against the flash of lightning, hunched like an old man with secrets. 2 stories, shutters hanging limp, a porch light flickering like a dying firefly. The fields around it were all mud and ghosts, every tree bending in prayer to the wind. I knocked because I didn't know what else to do. My knuckles hit wet wood. Thunder cracked. Then, the door creaked open on its own. I stepped inside and called out. "Hello. I'm sorry to bother, my car's stuck, and the storm." That's when I saw her. She was standing at the bottom of the staircase, just beyond the entryway, holding a lantern. Pale skin, dark hair falling in damp curls, wearing a white nightgown that looked older than both of us. She didn't seem surprised to see me. "You're cold," she said, her voice soft but sure. "Come sit by the fire." I should have hesitated. I didn't. The living room was dim, lit only by a few candles and the glow of coals in the hearth. She made tea, no electricity, no kettle whistle, just steam rising from a cup she said had been left warming on the stones. We sat across from each other, and she smiled like we'd done this before. Like we were picking up an old conversation. "You came through the storm," she said, stirring her own tea with a finger. "I knew you would." I tried to ask her name, but she changed the subject. Talked instead of the rain, the wind, the way it always brought things home. Her eyes shimmered in the candlelight, too still. Too knowing. She asked me to stay the night. Just until the storm passes. And maybe it was the tea, or the way she looked at me like she already knew what I'd say, but I nodded. She led me upstairs. The hall was narrow, the wallpaper peeling like old skin. She pointed to a room at the end. "This one's safe. Don't open the other doors." I laughed, thinking it a joke. But she didn't. "There are things," she whispered, "that don't like being disturbed." Then she closed the door behind me. And I swear to God, I heard a voice behind the wall whisper, "You came back." The room was colder than it should have been, despite the crackling fire downstairs. The kind of cold that sits behind your ribs and breathes softly on your heart. The wallpaper was floral, but faded, like it had been crying for years. The only furniture was a bed with iron posts, a warped dresser, and a mirror that had been covered with a white sheet. I didn't question it. Not yet. She came to visit me that night, the girl, still barefoot, still in that impossibly clean nightgown, despite the storm. She knocked first, 3 soft taps. Her silhouette in the hallway looked stretched somehow, like the shadows loved her more than they should. I brought you something, she said, holding out a small porcelain box. Inside was a single piece of candy, wrapped in wax paper. My mother used to give me these. Helps with the voices. I froze. What voices? She tilted her head, like a bird listening to distant thunder. You'll hear them soon. They know you're here now. I asked again for her name, but she only smiled and sat down at the edge of the bed. We talked for hours, or maybe it was minutes. I can't say. Time moves strangely when the only light is fire and the storm outside keeps tapping at the windows like fingers begging to be let in. She asked me about my childhood. My first heartbreak. She laughed softly when I told her about the scar on my hand, how I got it climbing a fence in 7th grade. She never answered questions about herself. If I pressed, she'd reach for the mirror with the sheet over it, fingers grazing the edge, then stop. Every time. When I asked to go downstairs, to grab my bag, to get more tea, anything, she said, please don't. Her voice didn't rise, but the room seemed to lean in on me, like the walls were listening. They don't like it when people wander, she said, eyes drifting to the floorboards. That night, as I lay in the cold bed with the candle's light dying, I heard it. A voice in the wall. Faint. Dry. You were late. I sat up. Pressed my ear to the peeling wallpaper. More voices. A child humming. A woman sobbing. Something scratching softly, softly, beneath the floor. And behind it all, her voice, whispering from somewhere beyond the wall. Don't leave me again. The candle burned itself out just before dawn. I'd barely slept. The voices had gone quiet around 3, but the silence felt worse, like the house itself was holding its breath. I sat on the edge of the bed until the pale light of morning crept in through the cracked window, painting long gray fingers across the floor. That's when I heard the sound, scraping, from just beyond the door. Not footsteps, but something being dragged. Slow. Rhythmic. It moved past the room and down the hall. I waited until the sound vanished completely before I dared move. I opened the door. The hallway was empty. But the walls, they were no longer wallpapered. They were blackened. Charred. Downstairs, the hearth had gone cold. The candles were gone. Cobwebs coated the ceiling like gauze. Everything I'd seen the night before, the tea, the warmth, the softness of her voice, was wrong. I stepped outside into a gray, silent world. The storm was gone, but so was the farmhouse. It was nothing but a skeleton of its former self, walls black with soot, windows shattered like eyes that had cried fire. The porch where she'd stood with her lantern had collapsed. Ash clung to my boots as I wandered the ruins, my breath catching in my throat. But what broke me completely, was the 2nd floor. The room I'd slept in was gone, roof caved in, and beneath it, beneath the rubble, something caught the morning light, a piece of scorched porcelain. The candy box. Still intact. I don't know how long I stood there before the old man approached. Came hobbling down the dirt road with a cane and a look of quiet wariness. His name was Marvin. Said he lived a few miles out, saw my car near the woods and came to check. I asked him what happened here. He squinted at the ruins and said simply, that place burned down 40 years ago. Folks stopped talking about it. Tragic story. I asked what kind of tragedy. He sighed. There was a girl. Sweet thing. Lived here with her mother. Used to be the talk of the town, back when folks still farmed this land. Had herself a beau from the next county over. Promised to come for her before the war took him. Marvin shook his head. He never came. House caught fire that winter. Some say she lit it herself, waiting in that upstairs room. They never found the boy. Or his body. My mouth went dry. He looked at me, like he already knew what I'd say. "You see her?" he asked quietly. I couldn't speak. I could only nod. Marvin stared at the ruins, eyes distant. Some say she never left. Still waits. Calls out to travelers, lures them in with light and warm tea and pretty eyes. He looked at me, suddenly stern. "If you took anything from her, you best put it back." I left that place without looking back. Didn't even think about grabbing my bag from the car. I drove until the fields turned to roads, and the roads turned to towns, and the towns turned to noise. Civilization never felt so fragile. Back in my apartment, everything was exactly as I'd left it, familiar, mundane, safe. I locked the door, showered 3 times, and left every light on. The farmhouse felt like a bad dream, like something my brain had conjured from loneliness and too much rain. But that night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face. Not as she was when I met her, but as she stood in a mirror I'd never dared uncover. Hair soaked in ash, eyes black and bottomless, skin like burned parchment. Mouth open, whispering behind the glass. "You came through the storm." I told myself it wasn't real. It couldn't be. Rational thought clung to me like a life raft. But then I reached into the coat I hadn't touched since that night. At first, I just felt something brittle inside the pocket, something dry and delicate, like crumpled paper. I pulled it out with shaking fingers. It was a slip of yellowing parchment. Old. Brittle. The writing was scrawled in something dark, not ink. Something that left a faint, greasy residue on my skin. It smelled like soot. The message read, in looping cursive. "Come back. The storm returns." And beneath that, barely visible, were the faint outlines of a handprint. Not mine. I don't sleep anymore. Every time it rains, the lights flicker. My phone rings once at midnight, and when I answer, there's only the sound of crackling fire. I moved across the country. Burned the coat. Burned the candy box. But the messages still come, carved into foggy windows, found in dirt on my doorstep, once even written across my bathroom mirror in something that smelled like smoke and roses. She's patient. I'll give her that. And outside tonight, clouds are gathering. Thunder murmurs like an old promise. They say some places are wounds in the world, places where sorrow echoes louder than time. I walked into one. And now, it's walking into me. They say the dead don't talk. But I met one who did. It was autumn, one of those strange afternoons when the sky forgets to shine and the trees look like they're bleeding. I was deep in the old hollow cemetery, a forgotten plot of land just outside the edge of town, where the stones tilt like drunks and the paths vanish beneath rotting leaves. I'd been photographing gravestones for a university project, something about Victorian funerary art. Honestly, I just liked the silence. That's when I saw her. She stood perfectly still by a weathered headstone, so worn it was almost a stump. No name. No dates. Just a patch of wild violets growing at its base, too bright for the season. Her coat was the kind of deep forest green you only see in paintings, and her hair was dark, twisted into a loose braid that trailed down her shoulder like ivy. She didn't turn when I stepped closer, though my boots cracked loud against the gravel. "I wouldn't take that one's photo," she said suddenly, soft but clear. I froze. Why not? She knelt beside the grave, brushing leaves away with delicate fingers. No one remembers who they were. Not anymore. It's cruel to take what little they have left. There was something old in her voice, something too still, like the cemetery itself. I asked her name. "Maribel," she said. I come here often. I glanced around. The cemetery was empty, silent except for the distant rustle of trees. The wind stirred, sharp and sudden, carrying the scent of earth and something faintly sweet, lilac or decay, I couldn't tell. "Do you live nearby?" I asked. She didn't answer, just placed a small white flower, a bell-shaped bloom I couldn't name, at the foot of the nameless stone. It looked freshly picked, pristine. But when I looked back, the flower she'd placed was already there. Another one. As if it had been waiting. "I should go," she said then, brushing off her skirt. "This place doesn't like to be watched too long." She walked away without a sound, her boots not so much as crunching the gravel. I snapped a single photo as she passed through the broken arch at the cemetery's edge. When I checked my camera later, the picture was perfect, except she wasn't in it. I returned the next day, camera in hand, under a sky that threatened rain but never quite delivered. I wasn't sure what I expected, maybe that I'd imagined her. But there she was again, standing by the same stone, wearing the same coat, her braid unaltered, not a hair out of place. "Back again," she said, her eyes not leaving the grave. "Some stones aren't satisfied with one visit." I laughed awkwardly, trying to read her. I was hoping to learn more. About this place. About you. That's when she began to talk. Not like people do, but like pages turning in a very old book. She told me about the plague of 1911, not the one you read about, but a smaller, crueler sickness that swept through our county. Took whole families in a night. It never made the papers, she said, because no one important died. Only the quiet ones. The poor. The forgotten. She recited names I'd never heard, tragedies buried with the bones. A girl found frozen in her attic, clutching her baby brother. A mother who sang lullabies while coughing blood. A boy who drew wings on the walls of his room before vanishing. "How do you know all this?" I asked. She smiled gently. "Because I remember." We walked through the rows of graves, her hand trailing across the stones like she was greeting old friends. She knew every name, even the ones worn down to dust. And every so often, we'd pass one of those strange white flowers, bell-shaped and too fresh, nestled beside the headstones. Always at her feet. "Are those yours?" I asked. She tilted her head. "They grow for who's remembered." That night, I couldn't sleep. My dreams were full of whispers and bells, of soft footsteps behind me in the fog. I woke up and checked my phone, only to find a notification from my photo app. New image detected. It was a picture I hadn't taken. Maribel, kneeling by the nameless stone, eyes closed as if in prayer. But behind her, just faintly visible in the mist, were dozens of blurred faces, watching. I couldn't shake the image. The photo, her in sharp focus, and behind her, the half-seen crowd, pale and quiet like frostbite ghosts. I didn't remember taking it. I didn't remember being close enough to. The next morning, I printed it anyway, thinking maybe someone else could explain. I brought it to Mr. Halbert, my neighbor across the street. He was nearly 90, a relic himself, sharp as broken glass and just as likely to cut if you weren't careful. But he knew things. He always had. "Recognize her?" I asked, sliding the photo across his cluttered workbench. He didn't even blink. Just leaned in, narrowed those cataract-clouded eyes, and muttered, "God Almighty." I waited. "Her name's Maribel Ashcroft," he finally said, voice brittle. "She lived just up the hill, old Ashcroft estate, burned down decades ago. She was 17 when she died. Winter plague. They buried her in Old Hollow, along with the rest who never made it out of that winter." I laughed nervously, waiting for him to say he was joking. He didn't. "She was one of the first," he added, eyes now locked on mine. "Caretaker said her grave was always strange. Flowers that wouldn't die. Snow that melted around it. A girl who visits and vanishes. I could barely breathe. But I've talked to her. She's there. She's still there, he said quietly. And if she's talking to you, you best stop answering. He told me the old stories then, the ones people whisper when they think no one's listening. That Maribel had been the first to fall ill, but didn't die right away. That she wandered the woods in the final nights, delirious and barefoot, singing to someone no one could see. That when they finally buried her, the bell they'd tied to her toe, in case she'd been buried alive, rang 3 nights after. I left his house shaking, the photo stuffed in my coat. I told myself I wouldn't go back. That I'd delete the pictures, forget the cemetery, forget her. But when I got home, there was a white flower on my windowsill. Bell-shaped. Fresh. And outside, just at the tree line, someone in a green coat was waiting. I told myself I wouldn't go. I really did. But there's something about her, about that place, that settles into your bones. Like a chill you can't shake, no matter how many coats you wear. I dreamed of her every night, walking between the stones, whispering names to the wind, her voice drifting just out of reach. In one dream, she turned to me with hollow eyes and whispered, "Come see." So I went. Dawn broke slow that morning, all gray and bruised. I walked through the dew-slick grass of Old Hollow Cemetery, past the tilted stones and the sagging trees, to the grave with no name. Her grave. She was there. Kneeling. Waiting. She looked up at me, sad and soft, like someone who'd been waiting a long time for someone to understand. "I didn't want to be alone anymore," she said. I knelt beside her. "You never were. You remember all of them." A small smile touched her lips. Remembering isn't the same as being seen. The wind died. Not a leaf stirred. Even the birds were silent. She touched the stone gently with one hand, brushed it like a page she was afraid to turn. "Look," she said. I turned my gaze to the headstone. And this time, there was a name. Maribel Ashcroft. Born 1894, died 1911. And beneath it, carved fresh and deep into the weathered granite, was another line. Photographer, beloved friend, 1995 to 2023. My breath caught. My legs refused to move. I didn't. What is this? What does it mean? My voice cracked in the silence. Her fingers slipped into mine, ice cold. You remembered me. You saw me. That's all it takes. The flowers bloomed around us, dozens of those bell-shaped blossoms, curling and swaying where no wind blew. The air shimmered like heat rising from pavement, though the morning was cold. My heart pounded, but I couldn't pull away. "You don't have to be afraid," she whispered. "You'll forget the cold." And then, silence. When the groundskeeper came by at noon, he found the cemetery as empty as ever. Only one thing had changed. Where once there was an unmarked stone, now there were 2 names. And at their base, the white flowers still bloomed. Unwilted. Ever watching.